Right now, authorities are responding to what they're calling a tragic incident at one of Dubai's most exclusive addresses. At exactly 4:47 in the morning on November 15, 2022, emergency dispatch received a call from a penthouse on the 47th floor of the Azure Residence Tower. The caller, a male voice speaking Arabic with precise, controlled tones, reported an unresponsive female. But this wasn't just any emergency call, and the victim wasn't just any woman. When paramedics arrived at the sprawling 8,000-square-foot penthouse, they found 23-year-old Alia Marie Navarro hanging in the ensuite bathroom of the master bedroom. Marble floors, gold fixtures, rose petals still scattered across Italian silk sheets. Standing in the doorway, composed and already on the phone with his attorney, was Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Nahyan, a 47-year-old member of Dubai's extended royal family. A man whose wedding to this young Filipina woman had taken place just 72 hours earlier. A marriage that had cost him $2.3 million. What investigators would discover in the following weeks would reveal a transaction disguised as romance, a medieval obsession wrapped in modern wealth, and a young woman who became collateral damage in one man's quest to own something that can never truly be bought: purity. This is the true story of how a desperate family's dreams became their daughter's nightmare, and how a billionaire's obsession with virginity led to a death that two continents would soon be fighting to explain. Alia Marie Navarro wasn't born into poverty, but she understood its weight from the moment she could form memories. Born on February 3, 1999, in Cebu City, Philippines, she entered a world where every peso mattered and every opportunity had to be fought for. Her father, Roberto Navarro, was a jeepney driver who worked 16-hour days navigating Cebu's chaotic streets. His hands permanently stained with engine grease and his back curved from decades of lifting, fixing, and pushing forward. Her mother, Maria Patel Navarro, had immigrated from Gujarat, India, in 1995, carrying nothing but a nursing degree that the Philippines wouldn't recognize and a determination to build something better. Maria and Roberto met in 1997 at the electrical contracting company where she kept books and he worked as a master electrician's assistant. Their courtship was a collision of cultures, Hindi lullabies meeting Tagalog prayers. But their marriage in 1998 was built on something stronger than tradition. It was built on shared hunger for a better life. When Alia was born the following year, she became the embodiment of that hunger, the bridge between two worlds, the promise that sacrifice might actually lead somewhere. Growing up biracial in Cebu taught Alia to read rooms before she entered them. At home, her mother spoke Hindi while cooking dal and paneer, filling their small concrete house with spices that made the neighbors curious. Her father taught her Cebuano and Tagalog, how to fix a jeepney's engine with wire and prayer, how to negotiate with street vendors who thought a little girl couldn't count change. At San Pedro Catholic School, where she earned a scholarship based on test scores that shocked her teachers, she learned English from American textbooks and the art of being exactly what people needed her to be. She was brilliant, not just smart, brilliant. Valedictorian at 16 despite studying by candlelight during Cebu's frequent brownouts. Full scholarship to the University of San Carlos for business administration, beating out hundreds of wealthier students whose parents could afford test prep. She had dreams that seemed impossible from a house with a tin roof and walls so thin you could hear the neighbors' arguments. She wanted to open an art gallery, a real one, showcasing Filipino painters who never got seen because they weren't born in Manila or didn't have connections to wealthy collectors. Because Alia's other gift, the one that kept her sane through the pressure and the poverty, was art. She painted religious icons, intricate depictions of the Virgin Mary and Navarro that she sold at the carbon market for 300 pesos each. Every brushstroke was a prayer, every completed canvas a small rebellion against a life that wanted to keep her small. But then 2020 arrived, and with it, the accident that would change everything. Roberto's jeepney was hit by a delivery truck whose driver had been awake for 20 hours straight. The impact shattered Roberto's spine in 3 places, left him paralyzed from the waist down, and buried the Navarro family under 450,000 pesos in medical debt. That's about $8,000, a sum that might as well have been $8 million for a family living month to month. Maria took extra shifts at a Chinese restaurant where she wasn't paid for overtime. Alia's younger siblings, Michael 19, Sophia 17, and the 14-year-old twins Carlos and Carmen all dropped out of their schools to work in the market, in construction, anywhere that would pay them. Alia was 21, 6 months from graduating with honors, and watching her family drown. She started tutoring rich kids whose parents paid her 1,000 pesos an hour to teach them things they'd never need to know. She sold her paintings for less, faster, anything to contribute. And every night, she knelt before the small altar in their living room, the one with the Virgin Mary statue her Lola Rosa had brought from the province, and she prayed for a miracle. What she got instead was an opportunity. And sometimes those two things look exactly the same until it's too late to tell the difference. In March of 2021, a recruiter from Pearl Horizon Cultural Exchange visited the University of San Carlos. They were looking for bright, articulate, multilingual Filipinos to work in Dubai as cultural liaisons for the UAE's Filipino community programs. The position paid $1,800 a month, included housing, and offered the kind of visa sponsorship that could change a family's trajectory. Alia spoke 3 languages fluently, Tagalog, English, and Hindi, and she taught herself basic Arabic from YouTube videos because she understood that language was currency. She applied. She interviewed. And in July 2021, at 22 years old, Alia Marie Navarro boarded a plane to Dubai with a suitcase full of modest dresses, a Bible her Lola Rosa had pressed into her hands, and a promise to send money home every single month. "Remember who you are?" Lola Rosa had whispered at the airport, gripping Alia's face with hands that smelled like sampaguita flowers and decades of prayer. "Your body is a temple. No man, no money, no promise is worth more than your soul. You understand me, Anak?" Alia had nodded, kissed her grandmother's weathered cheek, and walked toward a future she thought she could control. Dubai was everything Cebu wasn't. Clean, organized, staggeringly wealthy. The cultural exchange program set her up in a shared apartment with 3 other Filipino women in the Dara district, far from the glittering towers of downtown Dubai but close to the Filipino restaurants and remittance centers that made the city feel less alien. Her job was real, coordinating charity events, translating documents, helping Filipino domestic workers navigate visa issues. She was good at it. Great at it, actually. Within 6 months, her supervisor was assigning her to higher-profile events, the ones where diplomats and businessmen wrote checks with more zeros than she'd seen in her entire life. She sent $1,200 home every month, kept $600 for herself, lived on instant noodles and free food from events, watched her family's debt shrink slowly, agonizingly, but shrink. Her father got a better wheelchair. The twins went back to school. Sophia enrolled in a technical course. Every sacrifice felt worth it because she could see it working. But Alia was lonely in a way she'd never been lonely before. In Cebu, poverty came with community. Here, wealth came with isolation. Her roommates worked opposite schedules. Her family was 7 hours behind and always exhausted when she called. And dating? Impossible. The Filipino men she met were remittance workers like her, too tired and too broke to imagine romance. The Emirati men who showed interest at events saw her as exotic, temporary, available. She rejected them all with the same polite firmness her mother had taught her. Because Alia had made herself a promise, one that had nothing to do with religion and everything to do with control. Her virginity wasn't about Catholic guilt or cultural expectation. It was the one thing in her life that was completely, totally hers. Not her family's to leverage. Not her employer's to exploit. Not some man's to claim. In a life where every choice was made by necessity, this was the one choice she made by design. She was saving herself, not for marriage, but for a moment when she'd actually want to give herself to someone. When it would mean something beyond survival or obligation or transaction. That promise would become the weapon that destroyed her. Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Nahyan was the kind of man whose wealth made him invisible to normal people and hypervisible to anyone who mattered. At 47, he belonged to a minor branch of Dubai's ruling family, connected enough to open doors but distant enough from the throne to avoid serious scrutiny. His fortune, estimated at $850 million, came from real estate development, a pearl trading business his grandfather had started, and the kind of investments that multiply when you have enough money to never need more. He'd attended the London School of Economics in the late 90s, returned to Dubai with a degree in economics and a taste for Western comforts balanced against Emirati tradition. His business cards said CEO. His passport said royalty. His social media showed him at charity galas, funding literacy programs, posing with orphans, the progressive face of a modernizing nation. But Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Nahyan had a secret that money and connections had kept buried for over a decade. He was obsessed with virginity in a way that went far beyond cultural tradition into something psychological, something broken. His mother's highly publicized affair when he was 12, the scandal that had rocked his family and left his father humiliated, had planted something dark in young Hamdan's mind, a belief that women were inherently deceptive, that the only way to trust one was to own her before anyone else could pollute her. He'd tried marriage 3 times before through mut'a, temporary Islamic marriages that were legal but never publicized. Each one had ended the same way. A young woman from a poor country, an enormous mahr payment to her family, a wedding night obsession with proof. And then, when the woman couldn't or wouldn't provide the verification he demanded, a payoff, a non-disclosure agreement, and a one-way ticket home. In 2017, it was Jasmine Torres, a 19-year-old from Manila. In 2019, Nadia Popescu, a 20-year-old Romanian gymnast. In 2021, Suni Chai Wang, a 21-year-old from Bangkok who disappeared so completely after leaving Dubai that even her own family couldn't find her. Sheikh Hamdan told himself he wasn't a monster. He was simply a man who refused to be deceived. A man who'd been raised watching his father destroyed by a woman's lies. A man who deserved certainty in an uncertain world. And in 2022, as he approached 50 and felt the weight of producing legitimate heirs, he decided to try one more time. To find one more perfect, untouched woman who could give him what he needed, proof that he was worthy of something pure. He found her on March 23, 2022, at the Burj Al Arab. The event was called Bridging Cultures, a UAE-Philippines friendship night funded by various Emirates companies looking to strengthen business ties with one of their largest expat communities. Alia was there as a translator and cultural liaison, wearing a conservative teal dress and a smile that had been practiced in the mirror to look warm without inviting. She gave a 5-minute speech about Filipino contributions to Dubai's growth, thanked the sponsors in English, Arabic, and Tagalog, and performed a brief traditional dance that she'd learned specifically for events like this. Sheikh Hamdan noticed everything. The grace with which she moved, the intelligence in how she answered questions from diplomats, the modesty of her dress and demeanor, the way she lowered her eyes when men spoke to her, a gesture that could have been cultural or could have been something deeper, submissiveness, purity, exactly what he'd been searching for. He didn't approach her directly. Men like Sheikh Hamdan didn't chase. They acquired. He sent his personal aide, Khalid Al-Mazrui, to invite Miss Navarro to a private meeting the following week to discuss joining an advisory board for Filipino cultural initiatives. The pay would be generous. The work would be meaningful. And it would give her access to networks that could change her career. Alia hesitated. She'd learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good, especially from wealthy men. But this was different. It was professional. Came through official channels. And the money, an extra $1,000 a month for quarterly meetings and occasional consulting, would cut her family's debt repayment timeline in half. She accepted. Their first meeting was at the Four Seasons, in a conference room with glass walls, fully visible to anyone passing by. Sheikh Hamdan was respectful, asking about her family, her education, her faith. He talked about his own commitment to preserving traditional values in a modernizing world. He asked thoughtful questions about Filipino culture, about the challenges her community faced in the UAE, about her personal dreams beyond just survival. And Alia, who'd spent 2 years being lonely and invisible, felt seen, not objectified, not exoticized, seen. The meetings became monthly, always professional, always in public spaces. But the conversations grew more personal. He told her about losing his mother's respect as a child, about the pressure of family expectations, about feeling trapped between tradition and progress. She told him about the accident, about the weight of being her family's salvation, about painting Navarro because it was the only time she felt like herself instead of someone's daughter or sister or employee. By August, the meetings had moved to private dinners. By September, he was sending gifts to her apartment. Not jewelry or clothes, books, art supplies, a new phone because hers was falling apart. Every gift came with a note. For your dreams, not as payment. And then, on October 1st, 2022, Sheikh asked if he could speak to her family via video call. He had something important to discuss. The video call happened on a Sunday afternoon, Dubai time, which meant morning in Cebu. The Navarro family gathered around Maria's cracked phone screen in their small living room, Roberto in his wheelchair, Maria standing behind him with her hands on his shoulders. The younger siblings crowded on the couch. Lola Rosa sat in the corner, quiet, her rosary beads moving through her fingers like she was counting down to something terrible. Sheikh appeared on screen in a pristine white kandura, the traditional Emirati robe that immediately communicated wealth and status. He greeted them in careful Tagalog that he'd clearly practiced, then switched to English that everyone could follow. Mr. and Mrs. Navarro, I want to thank you for raising such an exceptional daughter. Alia's intelligence, her character, her faith, these qualities are rare in the modern world. I've spent the past 6 months coming to know her, and I would like to ask for your blessing to marry her. Silence. The kind that happens when people's brains can't process what they've just heard. Then chaos. Maria gasping. Roberto asking Alia if this was some kind of joke. The siblings looking at each other with wide eyes. Only Lola Rosa stayed still, watching the screen with the expression of someone who'd seen this story before. Sheikh continued, his voice smooth as silk over steel. In Islamic tradition, the mahr, the dowry, is meant to honor the bride and provide security for her future. I would like to offer $2.3 million. $1 million will go directly to your family immediately upon signing the marriage contract. The remaining $1.3 million will be placed in a trust for Alia, accessible to her throughout our marriage. $2.3 million. The number hung in the digital air between Cebu and Dubai like a hallucination. That was more than the Navarro family would earn in 5 lifetimes. That was Roberto's medical debt erased, paid off, forgotten. That was all 4 younger siblings through university. That was a real house with real walls and a roof that didn't leak. That was Maria never having to work herself to exhaustion again. That was everything they'd prayed for since the accident. Alia, her father said, and his voice was shaking, is this real? Do you want this? And here's where the trap really closed, because what could Alia say? That she barely knew this man beyond pleasant conversations? That she'd never even considered him romantically until this exact moment? That the whole thing felt like a business proposition disguised as a proposal? She could see her mother's face, the hope battling with disbelief. She could see her siblings, young enough to still believe in fairy tales. She could see her father, who'd spent 2 years hating himself for the accident that wasn't his fault, finally seeing a way to give his family something instead of just taking from them. He's been very kind to me, Alia said carefully, very respectful, and he shares our faith in the importance of family and tradition. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. And Sheikh, who'd done this dance before, knew that silence was agreement when the alternative was disappointing everyone you loved. The engagement period lasted 13 months, from October 2022 to November 2023. Sheikh called it culturally appropriate. What it actually was conditioning. Alia was moved out of her shared apartment in Dara into a private 1-bedroom in Dubai Marina. 15th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking water she could never afford to touch. The rent was $5,500 a month. He paid it without blinking. She was also slowly, systematically cut off from everyone and everything that had made her Alia Navarro. Her work visa was transferred from Pearl Horizon to a company Sheikh owned. Her job became cultural consultant, which meant being available when he wanted her and invisible when he didn't. Her Filipino friends from the shared apartment tried to visit. Security wouldn't let them up. They tried to call. Her number had changed. One of them, Carmen, managed to find her at a grocery store. Alia, where have you been? We've been so worried. I'm fine. Just busy with wedding preparations. You look thin. Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Carmen, I'm fine. Promise. I'll reach out after the wedding. Carmen had grabbed her hand, lowered her voice. My cousin worked for a royal family. She said sometimes the men, they have specific requirements for their wives. Requirements about your body, about proof. Did he ask you about that? Alia had pulled her hand away, suddenly cold despite the Dubai heat. He's a good man. You don't understand. But she'd started to wonder what she didn't understand. In January 2023, 4 months into the engagement, Khalid Al-Mazrouei, Sheikh Hamdan's legal advisor and fixer, arranged what he called a routine premarital health screening. Dr. Rashid Al-Mansouri, a private physician who catered exclusively to wealthy Emiratis, met Alia at a clinic in Jumeirah that looked more like a spa than a medical facility. This is standard procedure for all marriages of significance, Dr. Al-Mansouri explained, his English perfect, his smile practiced. Blood work to check for genetic conditions, general health assessment, fertility indicators. Nothing invasive. Alia agreed to the blood draw, the urine sample, the external examination. But when the doctor suggested a pelvic exam to check reproductive health, something in his tone made her skin crawl. Is that really necessary? She asked. I've never had any problems. Simply to ensure you're capable of bearing children. His Excellency would like certainty. Then His Excellency can ask me. I'll do the blood work. That's it. Dr. Al-Mansouri smiled, made notes on his tablet, and said nothing more. But after Alia left, he called Sheikh Hamdan immediately. She refused the internal examination, Your Excellency. I cannot confirm virginity through external assessment and blood work alone. There was a pause. Then Sheikh Hamdan's voice, cold and controlled. Then we confirm on the wedding night. Prepare the protocol we discussed, the DNA verification, and make sure it's buried in the marriage documents. I want her signature on consent before she understands what she's consenting to. The marriage contract was 87 pages long, 70 pages in Arabic, 17 pages of English summary. Alia received it 3 weeks before the wedding with instructions to review and sign in Khalid's office by the end of the week. She tried to read it. She really did. The English version covered standard Islamic marriage terms, mahr amount and distribution schedule, housing provisions, divorce conditions, financial responsibilities. It all seemed straightforward if incredibly formal. The Arabic sections, Khalid assured her, were standard religious language, Quranic verses about marriage, legal formalities required by Sharia courts, prayers for blessing the union. Why so much Arabic if we're both going to speak English at home? Alia asked. Islamic marriages require specific phrasing in Arabic for legal validity. The English summary covers all the practical terms. Would you like me to have someone translate the religious sections for you? No, I trust you. That trust was the mistake that would cost her everything. Because buried on pages 62 and 63 of the Arabic text, in legal language that even native speakers would struggle to parse, was the virginity verification protocol. It stated that the bride consented to post-consummation medical examination including DNA and forensic sampling to verify purity claims made during courtship. It stated that if verification failed, the mahr would be nullified, the marriage voided, and immigration sponsorship terminated immediately. It stated that the bride agreed never to disclose the verification process to anyone under penalty of legal action for fraud and defamation. Alia Navarro signed every page, initialed every clause, dated the document November 10, 2023. She was smiling when she did it, thinking about her family's debt finally disappearing, about her father's face when the money cleared, about maybe, possibly, learning to love this man who'd been so patient with her. She had no idea she'd just signed a contract that treated her body as a product with a return policy. The wedding took place on November 14, 2023, at Sheikh Hamdan's private estate in Emirates Hills, Dubai's most exclusive neighborhood where houses started at $15 million and privacy was the ultimate luxury. 40 guests attended, all selected by the groom. Business associates, distant relatives, no one who actually knew either bride or groom as people. Alia's family watched via video link, their visa applications mysteriously delayed despite Sheikh Hamdan's promises to arrange everything. Technical issues with processing, Khalid had explained. We're working on it. They'll visit soon. They wouldn't. Sheikh Hamdan wanted no witnesses who might actually care about the bride's well-being. Alia wore a white gown that cost $35,000 and fit her like it was painted on. The designer had been hired to make her look like a virgin bride from a fairy tale. Innocent, pure, untouched. A gold hijab framed her face, delicate and sheer enough to show her features. The jewelry, borrowed from Sheikh Hamdan's family collection, was worth $500,000. She looked like a princess. She felt like a doll being dressed for someone else's fantasy. The ceremony was conducted by a conservative imam who emphasized wifely obedience in a way that made Alia shift uncomfortably. Sheikh Hamdan's vows talked about honor, purity, the sacred duty of protecting family lineage. Alia's vows, which had been written by Khalid and presented to her the night before, promised submission, faithfulness, and dedication to preserving the sanctity of their union. She spoke the words. She signed the marriage certificate. She smiled for photos that would be edited before her family ever saw them, removing the emptiness from her eyes. At 10 in the evening, they left for the Palm Jumeirah penthouse, the honeymoon suite, the place where their real life together would begin. In the car, Sheikh Hamdan was silent, checking his phone, sending texts Alia couldn't see. She tried to make conversation. Are you nervous? He looked at her like she'd said something strange. I don't get nervous. I simply ensure what I'm promised is what I receive. The words should have been a warning. Instead, Alia told herself he was talking about the marriage working out, about both of them being happy. She was still trying to believe this could be real, that she could be chosen for who she was instead of what she represented. The penthouse was obscene. 8,000 square feet of marble and glass and gold on the 47th floor. The view stretched across the Arabian Gulf, city lights reflecting off black water like fallen stars. Rose petals covered every surface. Candles burned in silver holders. Champagne chilled in a bucket even though neither of them drank alcohol. It was a set designed for seduction. What Alia didn't see were the cameras. Tiny lenses hidden in decorative art pieces. Sheikh Hamdan documented everything, keeping records in case he ever needed evidence of breach of contract. In case he needed to prove she'd deceived him. Why don't you freshen up, he suggested. Get comfortable. I have a call to make. Alia went to the bathroom, grateful for a moment alone. She changed out of the wedding gown into a white silk nightgown that had been laid out for her, another costume she hadn't chosen. She looked at herself in the mirror, this woman who was supposed to be starting her married life, and felt nothing. No excitement, no fear, just numbness. She prayed, Mary, Mother of God, help me. Help me want this. Help me believe this was the right choice. When she emerged, Sheikh Hamdan was on his phone speaking rapid Arabic. He saw her and smiled, but it wasn't a smile that reached his eyes. It was the smile of someone who'd just confirmed an appointment. Before we begin, he said, setting down his phone, there's a small formality. A tradition I follow. What kind of tradition? A medical verification. Just a simple procedure to confirm what we've both understood about your purity. It won't take long. Alia's blood went cold. What are you talking about? The doorbell rang. Sheikh Hamdan walked past her to answer it. Dr. Al-Mansuri entered carrying a silver medical case, wearing scrubs under his jacket. He nodded to Alia with professional detachment, like she was a patient, not a bride on her wedding night. What is this? Alia's voice was rising. Hamdan, what is he doing here? I told you. Verification. It's in the contract you signed. Pages 62 and 63, Arabic text, fully legal and binding. You consented to post-consummation examination to prove virginity through DNA sampling and tissue analysis. Alia backed toward the bedroom. That's not real. That's not a real thing. DNA doesn't prove virginity. Dr. Al-Mansuri opened his case. Sterile gloves, specimen containers, swabs, a tablet showing forms in Arabic and English. Advanced forensic analysis can detect indicators of previous sexual activity through cellular markers and tissue trauma patterns. Is cutting-edge science available only to elite clientele? It wasn't science. It was theater. Expensive, elaborate theater designed to satisfy a paranoid man's delusion. But Alia didn't know that. She was 23 years old, alone in a foreign country, legally married to a man she barely knew, and watching her wedding night turn into a medical examination. "I'm not doing this," she said. "This is insane." Sheikh Hamdan's expression didn't change. His voice stayed calm, reasonable, terrifying. "Alia, Habibti, if you have nothing to hide, there's no reason to resist. This is standard procedure for marriages of this significance. Protects both of us. Protects you from what? From me being human. From deception. The contract is clear. You claim to be a virgin. I'm simply verifying that claim. It's no different than authenticating a piece of art or appraising a diamond. We ensure value matches representation." And there it was, the truth underneath all the romance and promises. To Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Nahyan, Alia Navarro wasn't a wife. She was an acquisition, a collectible, a virgin he'd purchased for $2.3 million, and he was going to make damn sure the product was as advertised. Think of your wedding night. Think of the vulnerability, the intimacy, the trust required to share yourself with another person. Now imagine that moment replaced with sterile gloves, specimen containers, and a doctor treating your body like evidence in a criminal investigation. That's exactly where Alia Navarro found herself at 11:30 on the night of November 14, 2023, standing in a $47 million penthouse that had just transformed from honeymoon suite into interrogation room. Sheikh Hamdan gestured to the bedroom with the casual authority of a man who'd never been told no. The procedure is simple. Dr. Al-Mansouri will collect baseline samples, oral swabs for DNA reference, then after consummation will collect post-coital specimens to verify absence of foreign DNA and check tissue markers for previous trauma. The whole thing takes maybe 30 minutes. You cooperate, results confirm what you've told me, and we move forward with our marriage. Simple. Simple. The word hung in the air like poison. Alia looked at the doctor, at his medical case laid out on the marble nightstand like instruments of torture disguised as science. She looked at her husband of 6 hours, this man she'd convinced herself she could learn to love, and saw nothing in his eyes but the cold calculation of someone protecting an investment. "I won't do this," she said, and her voice was steadier than she felt. "You can't make me." Sheikh Hamdan's expression didn't change. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Dubai's glittering skyline like a king surveying his kingdom. "I'm not making you do anything, Alia. I'm simply enforcing a contract you signed willingly. But let me help you understand what refusal means." He turned back to face her, and now there was something sharp beneath the calm. "Your family received $500,000 last month as the first installment of the MAR. They've already spent it. Your father's medical bills paid. Your siblings' school fees paid. The new house in Cebu, down payment made. If you refuse this verification, I will consider our marriage contract void due to fraud. That money becomes a loan callable immediately with interest." Alia's legs went weak. Her father's house, the medical equipment keeping him comfortable. Her siblings finally back in school after 2 years of working in markets and construction sites. All of it built on money that could be taken back with a phone call. "But there's more," Sheikh Hamdan continued, his voice still terrifyingly calm. "Your visa is sponsored by my company. Refusal to fulfill marital obligations constitutes breach of your employment contract. That's visa fraud. I'll have you detained by immigration, deported within 48 hours, and your family will be left with debt they can't possibly repay and a daughter whose reputation is destroyed across 2 countries. Dr. Al-Mansouri cleared his throat. "Your Excellency, perhaps we should give Mrs. Al Nahyan time to understand that this is a medical procedure, not a punishment. This is standard practice in many traditional marriages. It protects both parties from future disputes about paternity, inheritance, family lineage." The doctor's tone was so reasonable, so professional, as if discussing a routine blood test instead of a degrading invasion. Alia wanted to scream. She wanted to run. But she was on the 47th floor of a building where every security guard worked for her husband. She was in a country where her legal status depended on his goodwill. She was trapped in a marriage she'd entered to save her family, and now that same family had become the weapon used against her. "Let me call my grandmother," Alia said. "Just let me talk to Lola Rosa for 5 minutes. After, Sheikh said. "After the verification, you can call anyone you want. Now you choose. Cooperate or I make the calls that destroy your family by morning." Cebu is 7 hours behind. They're probably having dinner right now. "Would you like me to interrupt their meal with the news that you've committed fraud and they owe me $500,000 plus interest?" The cruelty of it took her breath away. He wasn't just demanding her body. He was forcing her to choose between her dignity and her family's survival. Between being violated and being responsible for her father losing his wheelchair, her siblings dropping out of school again, her mother going back to 16-hour days at a restaurant where she wasn't paid for overtime. What kind of choice was that? It wasn't a choice at all. It was coercion dressed up as consent, exactly like the contract she'd signed without understanding what the Arabic text actually said. "Fine," Alia whispered. "Do your test. But I want it on record that I'm only agreeing because you're threatening my family. This isn't consent. This is extortion." Dr. Al-Mansuri pulled out his tablet. "Actually, Mrs. Al-Nayan, I need you to sign a consent form before we proceed. It states that you're voluntarily participating in this medical examination as part of your marital agreement. Standard liability protection." Alia laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "You want me to sign a form saying I'm doing this voluntarily while my husband stands there threatening to destroy my family if I refuse? That's not how consent works. That's not how any of this works." "Nevertheless," Sheikh said, "you'll sign it. Or we proceed with the alternative." He picked up his phone, pulled up a contact labeled Roberto Navarro. "One call. That's all it takes." Alia took the tablet from the doctor's hands. The form was in English and Arabic, stating that she consented to post-marital medical examination including intimate sample collection for the purpose of verifying premarital virginity claims made during courtship and engagement. It stated that she understood the procedure was voluntary and that she could withdraw consent at any time, though withdrawal might constitute breach of marriage contract terms. It was a legal fiction designed to protect them, not her. She signed it with shaking hands and her new name, Alia Navarro Al-Nayan, a name that already felt like a brand marking her as property. The procedure itself was clinical and humiliating in ways Alia couldn't have imagined. Dr. Al-Mansuri started with the oral swab, collecting cells from inside her cheek for DNA baseline. Then he asked her to provide a urine sample, which he tested immediately for pregnancy and STIs, as if either would prove anything about virginity. The results were negative, as they obviously would be, but he documented everything on his tablet with the thoroughness of someone building a legal case. Then came the part that made her want to die. The doctor explained that they needed to proceed with consummation so they could collect the postcoital samples that would allegedly prove she'd never had intercourse before. The logic was insane, pseudoscientific, a bastardization of forensic techniques used in assault cases. But Sheikh had paid enough money to make Dr. Al-Mansuri pretend it was legitimate medicine. Alia lay on the bed, still in her white nightgown, and stared at the ceiling while her husband of 6 hours approached her like a scientist approaching a lab specimen. There was no tenderness, no romance, no humanity. He was simply verifying the authenticity of a purchase. She dissociated, left her body and floated somewhere near the ceiling, watching this happen to someone else. The girl on the bed wasn't Alia Navarro, scholarship student and artist and daughter who sent money home every month. That girl had died somewhere between signing the contract and this moment. What remained was just a body, a vessel, a thing being examined for quality control. When it was over, Dr. Al-Mansuri returned with his specimen containers and collected samples with the detachment of someone swabbing a crime scene. He took photographs, measurements, tissue samples that made Alia bite her lip until it bled to keep from crying out. Sheikh watched everything, his face unreadable, making sure his investment was being properly authenticated. The whole thing took 47 minutes. Alia knew because she'd been staring at the clock on the nightstand, watching each minute pass like a countdown to the end of her old life. When it was finally over, Dr. Al-Mansuri packaged his samples in a small medical cooler. "I'll have preliminary results by tomorrow afternoon, Your Excellency. Full analysis takes 48 hours, but I should be able to confirm the primary findings within 24. He nodded to Alia with professional courtesy, as if he'd just completed a routine physical instead of participating in her degradation. Mrs. Al-Nahyan, try to rest. This has been stressful, but you've done very well. After he left, Sheikh Hamdan stood by the window again, checking his phone. You should sleep, he said without looking at her. Tomorrow we'll discuss the next phase of our marriage once we have the results. Alia pulled the sheet around herself like armor. And what happens if your fake test shows something you don't like? What if your doctor decides to tell you I'm not what you paid for? Then we'll deal with that, he said simply. But I don't anticipate problems. You seem like an honest girl, despite tonight's dramatics. Dramatics? He called her resistance to being violated dramatics. Alia understood in that moment that Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Nahyan didn't see her as human. She was a commodity he'd purchased, and tonight had been quality inspection. Nothing more. She waited until he went to the guest room, waited until she heard the door close and lock, and then she finally let herself cry. Silent, shoulder-shaking sobs that came from somewhere so deep she thought they might never stop. She cried for the girl who'd boarded a plane to Dubai thinking hard work could change her life. She cried for her family, who'd unknowingly sold her into this nightmare. She cried for her grandmother's warning that she'd ignored, for the future she'd imagined that would never exist now, for the person she'd been just 6 hours ago when she'd still believed in the possibility of love. When the tears finally stopped, Alia walked to the bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. Saw the bruises already forming on her arms where the doctor had gripped her. Saw the emptiness in her own eyes. Saw a woman she didn't recognize anymore. She thought about the ensuite bathroom, about the silk scarf hanging on the towel hook, about the marble doorframe that could hold weight. The thought came quickly, seductively, offering escape from a situation that had no other exits. Not yet, she told herself. Not until you know there's absolutely no other way out. But the seed had been planted. And in a locked penthouse on the 47th floor, with a husband who saw her as property and a family who needed her to stay silent, that seed was already beginning to grow. The next morning came too quickly and not quickly enough. Alia hadn't slept, just lay in the massive bed watching dawn break over Dubai, turning the Persian Gulf from black to gray to gold. Beautiful and utterly indifferent to the nightmare unfolding in this luxury prison. At 8 in the morning, a knock on the bedroom door. A maid entered, Filipina, maybe 35, with the carefully neutral expression of someone who'd learned not to see too much. She placed a breakfast tray on the side table. Fresh fruit, pastries, coffee, orange juice in crystal glasses. The kind of meal that would have seemed like impossible luxury a week ago. Now it just looked like props in a stage play where Alia had been cast as the happy bride. Ma'am, the maid said softly in Tagalog, is there anything else you need? Alia almost laughed. What she needed was a time machine, a different family, a universe where $2.3 million hadn't seemed like salvation. What she said was, what's your name? Rosa, ma'am. The same name as her grandmother. Of course it was. Rosa, how long have you worked for Sheikh Hamdan? 3 years, ma'am. Rosa's eyes flickered toward the door, nervous. Is everything all right? Has he, Alia lowered her voice, has he brought other women here? Other wives? Rosa's face went carefully blank. I'm not permitted to discuss His Excellency's private affairs, ma'am. I could lose my position. That was answer enough. Rosa left quickly, and Alia was alone again with breakfast she couldn't eat and thoughts that wouldn't stop circling. She needed to think strategically, not emotionally. What were her actual options? Option 1. Stay in this marriage, endure whatever other humiliations Sheikh Hamdan had planned, become the perfect obedient wife he'd purchased, live in luxury as a prisoner, eventually have his children, trap herself permanently. The thought made her physically ill. Option 2, try to leave. But her passport was in Sheikh Hamdan's safe. Her visa was sponsored by his company. Even if she made it to the Philippine embassy, what then? Her family owed him $500,000. He'd pursue them legally, destroy them financially, possibly have her arrested for visa fraud or breach of contract. They'd lose everything because of her choices. Option 3, the one she didn't want to think about but couldn't stop thinking about, Was the ensuite bathroom, the silk scarf, the permanent escape? At least then her family could claim she'd had a mental breakdown. Maybe Sheikh Hamdan would show some mercy, not pursue the debt against a family whose daughter had died. Maybe, but probably not. Men like him didn't become billionaires by being merciful. At 2 in the afternoon, Sheikh Hamdan entered without knocking. He looked refreshed, showered, wearing casual clothes that probably cost more than Rose's annual salary. Dr. Al-Mansouri called with preliminary results. There are some inconsistencies. Alia's heart stopped. What inconsistencies? The tissue analysis suggests possible prior activity. Scarring patterns consistent with previous penetration. But I rode horses as a child. I played sports. Hymens can break from anything. That's basic biology. The doctor acknowledges the results aren't conclusive. Sheikh Hamdan continued as if she hadn't spoken. Full DNA analysis takes another day. But I want to understand something, Alia. Before we married, were you completely honest with me? Did anything happen, even if you didn't consider it sex? Heavy petting with a boyfriend? An assault you blocked out? The gaslighting was breathtaking. He was making her question her own memories, her own body, her own truth. Nothing happened, she said, her voice cold. Ever. Your doctor is lying to you or he's incompetent or both. But I know my own history. Sheikh Hamdan studied her for a long moment. I want to believe you, but trust needs to be verified, especially when this much money is involved. So here's what we're going to do. You'll stay here while we wait for final results. No phone, no internet, no contact with anyone. If the tests confirm what you're saying, we move forward. If they don't, you have 2 choices. Confess to lying, sign an annulment, work out a repayment plan for your family. Or we involve lawyers, police, immigration. Your choice. You mean no choice at all, Alia said. That's not choices. That's just different flavors of destruction. Sheikh Hamdan shrugged. I'm being generous. Most men in my position would simply have you deported and sued. I'm offering you a path forward. Think about it. He left, and she heard the electronic lock click. She was officially imprisoned. Alia spent the next hours searching the penthouse for anything useful. Her phone was gone. The landline was password protected. The internet on the TV required login credentials she didn't have. The windows didn't open, or if they did, opening them from the 47th floor meant only one thing. She found her passport in Sheikh Hamdan's study. Locked in a safe she had no hope of opening. She found his laptop, password protected. She found documents in Arabic she couldn't read, bank statements showing transfers that made her 2.3 million look like pocket change. And she found something else. A folder in his desk drawer, not even hidden, like he didn't care if she saw. Documents from 2017, 2019, 2021. Marriage contracts with other women's names. Jasmine Torres, Nadia Popescu, Suni Chai Wang. Each contract had the same Arabic clauses, the same virginity verification protocols. Each file ended with annulment papers or settlement agreements. Except Suni's. Her file just stopped. No annulment. No settlement. Just a final note in English. Subject relocated. Matter closed. Alia's hands were shaking as she photographed the documents with a digital camera she found in the desk drawer. She didn't have a plan for what to do with the photos. She just knew she needed evidence that this wasn't normal, that she wasn't crazy, that Sheikh Hamdan had done this before and would do it again. That evening, Sheikh Hamdan returned with dinner from her favorite Filipino restaurant, the one in Dara she used to visit with her roommates in another lifetime. A peace offering, he said. While we wait for results, we should try to be civil. This could still work out, Alia. If you're telling the truth, we have a future together. Alia looked at the chicken adobo and lumpia and rice that should have made her homesick in a good way. Instead, they just reminded her of everything she'd lost. How many women have you done this to? She asked quietly. The verification ritual. How many women have sat exactly where I'm sitting, waiting for some fake test to determine their worth? Sheikh Hamdan's expression didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. The files in your desk. Jasmine, Nadia, Suni. What happened to them? They didn't work out, he said simply. Incompatibility. They were compensated and moved on. All except Sunni. Her file says subject relocated. What does that mean? Where is she? That's not your concern. His voice had gone cold. You should focus on your own situation, not on other people's failed relationships. Failed relationships. As if marriage was just a business deal that hadn't met performance metrics. Alia realized with crystalline clarity that Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Nahyan was never going to let her go. Whether the test results came back positive or negative, whether she confessed to things she'd never done or maintained her truth, he would always find new ways to control her. New tests, new verification protocols, new reasons to doubt. Because the doubt was the point, keeping her off balance, desperate, willing to do anything to prove herself worthy of basic human dignity. That night, Alia wrote letters. She used hotel stationery from the penthouse's desk, writing in the careful cursive her mother had taught her. One letter to Lola Rosa, one to her parents, one to her siblings. She didn't know if anyone would ever read them, but she needed to explain, needed to leave behind something that told the truth about what happened in this golden cage. In the letter to her grandmother, she wrote about the contract, the verification, the previous women. She wrote about feeling like a product being returned to the store. She wrote about the moment she realized that her virginity had never been about protection or purity. It had been about power. About men like Sheikh Hamdan needing to own something no one else had touched. About the impossibility of proving a negative, of demonstrating absence. How do you prove you've never done something? How do you verify emptiness? To her parents, she wrote about love and money. About how she understood why they'd pressured her to accept the proposal. About how poverty makes you see salvation in places where only exploitation lives. She forgave them. That was important. She needed them to know that she forgave them even as their choices destroyed her. To her siblings, she wrote about being careful. About understanding that gifts from powerful people always have invisible strings. About never signing documents you can't fully read. Never trusting people who isolate you from everyone you love. Never believing that any amount of money is worth your autonomy. She hid the letters in her Bible, the one Lola Rosa had given her, tucked between the pages of Psalms. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. She used to believe that. Now she understood that purity was just another weapon used against women, another way to measure their value by what they hadn't done instead of who they were. At 3 a.m, unable to sleep, unable to stop thinking, Alia stood in the bathroom doorway and looked at the silk scarf hanging on its hook. She'd been thinking about it for 2 days now. The idea had gone from terrifying to comforting. A way out that was completely, totally hers. The one choice Sheikh Hamdan couldn't take from her. Not yet, she told herself again. Wait for the test results. See if there's any possible path forward before you choose the only exit left. But deep down, in the part of herself she was trying very hard not to listen to, Alia Navarro already knew how this story ended. Not with a fairy tale wedding or a happily ever after. Not with justice or escape or rescue. It ended with a 23-year-old woman deciding that dying free was better than living owned. And that decision was getting closer with every passing hour in this beautiful, terrible prison 47 floors above a city that would never notice her absence. November 17, 2023. 48 hours since the wedding. 24 hours since Alia had been locked in the penthouse. The test results were due at noon. Sheikh Hamdan arrived at 11:45, earlier than expected, with Dr. Al-Mansuri trailing behind him like a shadow in expensive shoes. Alia was sitting by the window, dressed in the same white nightgown from 2 nights ago because everything else in the closet felt like costumes for a role she refused to play anymore. She didn't turn around when they entered, just kept staring at the gulf, at the water that stretched toward a horizon she'd never reach. The results are back, Sheikh Hamdan said, his voice professionally neutral. As I suspected, there are significant inconsistencies. Dr. Al-Mansuri cleared his throat. The DNA analysis shows no foreign genetic material, which supports Mrs. Al Nahyan's claim of no prior sexual activity. However, the tissue examination reveals scarring patterns and structural changes inconsistent with intact virginity. These could be from athletic activity, medical procedures, or previous penetration. The science cannot definitively determine cause. In other words, Alia said, still not turning around, your fake test can't actually prove anything. So you've tortured me for nothing. Sheikh Hamdan's patience was wearing thin. She could hear it in his voice. Alia, I need the truth. If something happened, childhood abuse, an assault you've repressed, a boyfriend you're ashamed to mention, tell me now. I can forgive mistakes if you're honest. But I cannot forgive deception. The manipulation was masterful. He was offering her an escape route, a confession that would absolve him of responsibility while branding her as damaged goods. She could claim some fictional trauma, let him play the magnanimous husband who stood by his broken bride, and live the rest of her life as his grateful prisoner. Or she could maintain her truth and be destroyed anyway. There was no winning. There had never been winning. This game was designed from the start to have only one possible outcome, her complete and total submission. I have nothing to confess, Alia said, finally turning to face them. Nothing happened. Not abuse, not boyfriends, not anything. Your doctor is either incompetent or lying to give you the results you wanted. Either way, I'm done participating in this insanity. Sheikh Hamdan's expression hardened. Then we have a problem. If you won't admit deception and you won't accept the medical findings, I have to assume you're fraudulently claiming virginity to secure the mar. That makes this a legal matter. He pulled out his phone, opened it to a video call. I think your family should understand what's happening. No, Alia said, panic rising. Don't call them. This is between us. Everything is between us and them, Sheikh Hamdan said coldly. That's how I structured this arrangement. You're not just my wife, you're my investment in your entire family. They need to know their daughter is jeopardizing everything they've worked for. The video connected. Morning in Cebu, the Navarro family gathered again around the phone screen. But this time there was no excitement, no hope, just confusion and growing fear. Alia could see her mother's face, already crying before anyone had spoken. Her father looked older, grayer, like the stress of the past 2 days had aged him years. Mr. and Mrs. Navarro, Sheikh Hamdan began, his voice grave. I'm calling because we have a serious situation. The medical verification we discussed has revealed inconsistencies in your daughter's claims about her virginity. She's refusing to provide honest explanation. What? Maria's voice was sharp. Alia, what is he talking about? What verification? Mama, it's a lie, Alia said quickly. He forced me to undergo medical testing. Degrading, humiliating testing. And now his doctor is claiming the results show something that isn't true. I've never been with anyone. You know that. You raised me. But her mother's face was already shutting down, choosing belief in the billionaire over belief in her daughter. Alia, if the doctor says there are problems, maybe you should think harder. Sometimes young people make mistakes and forget or block things out. The betrayal was complete. Her own mother, choosing money over truth. Roberto was silent, staring at something off-screen, unable or unwilling to meet his daughter's eyes. The siblings looked confused, too young to fully understand but old enough to sense disaster. Only Lola Rosa, standing in the background, was watching Alia with dawning horror. She knew. Somehow, she knew exactly what was happening. Sheikh Hamdan continued, relentless. I've been more than generous. I gave your family $500,000 in good faith. I offered Alia security, status, a life beyond anything she could have achieved alone. All I asked in return was honesty. If she cannot provide that, I'll have to pursue this legally. Fraud charges, visa violations, recovery of all funds paid, plus interest and damages. By my calculation, your family will owe approximately $750,000. The number hit like a physical blow. Alia watched her father's face crumble, watched her mother's hands go to her mouth, watched her siblings' confusion turn to fear. They understood that number. That was debt that would destroy them across generations. That was losing everything, the house, the medical care, the school fees, and ending up worse than they'd started because now they'd have massive debt with no way to pay it. Please, Roberto finally spoke, his voice breaking. Your Excellency, there must be some misunderstanding. Our daughter is a good girl. Religious. She wouldn't lie about something like this. Then she needs to explain the medical findings, Sheikh Hamdan said. or confess to what she's hiding. Otherwise, I have no choice but to protect my interests. Alia, her mother said, and now she was openly sobbing. Please, Anik, just tell him whatever happened. Tell him the truth so we can fix this. Don't let your pride destroy everything. But there is no truth except what I've already said. Alia replied, her voice hollow. He's forcing me to confess to things that never happened so he can control me. Can't you see that? This was never about marriage. It was about buying someone he could break. You're being hysterical, Sheikh Hamdan said dismissively. The stress of marriage is affecting your judgment. Perhaps you need psychological evaluation. Dr. Al-Mansuri nodded. I can recommend an excellent psychiatrist. Sometimes young brides experience adjustment disorders that manifest as confusion about their own histories. Gaslighting disguised as concern. They were going to diagnose her with mental illness now. Add that to her list of defects. Alia looked at her family on the screen one last time. Saw her mother begging. Her father defeated. Her siblings scared. And Lola Rosa, tears streaming down her weathered face, whispering words Alia could barely hear through the phone. Come home, Anik. Whatever it costs, come home. But there was no home to come back to. Sheikh Hamdan had made sure of that. He owned her family's debt, their hope, their future. Going home meant watching them lose everything because of her. Staying meant losing herself piece by piece until nothing remained. She was 23 years old and trapped in a situation with no exits except the one she'd been thinking about for 2 days now. I need time alone, Alia said quietly. Please, just give me time to think. Sheikh Hamdan studied her for a moment, then nodded. You have until 6 this evening. That's 6 hours to decide. Confess and we work something out. Refuse and I make the calls that destroy your family by morning. He ended the video call, pocketed his phone, and left with the doctor. The electronic lock clicked. Alone again, Alia sat very still for a long time, watching the afternoon sun move across the floor. She thought about her childhood in Cebu, painting Navarro by candlelight. She thought about her grandmother's hands, rough from decades of work, gentle when they touched her face. She thought about the girl who'd boarded a plane to Dubai full of hope and determination. That girl was dead now. She died the moment she signed a contract she couldn't read. Died again on a wedding night that became a medical examination. Died finally this morning when her own mother chose money over believing her daughter's truth. What remained wasn't enough to keep fighting for. At 3 in the afternoon, Alia took the letters she'd written and placed them carefully on the bed. She opened her Bible to Psalm 23, the one about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. She'd recited it so many times as a child, never imagining she'd find comfort in it this way. She changed out of the white nightgown into the simple floral dress she'd brought from home, the one piece of clothing in this entire penthouse that was actually hers. Then she went to the bathroom. The silk scarf was expensive, probably cost more than her family's monthly income. How fitting that Sheikh Hamdan's money would be what freed her from his control. She tested the doorframe, solid marble built to last centuries. More than strong enough. She practiced the knot, surprised at how steady her hands were. Maybe this was what peace felt like. Not happiness, but the absence of impossible choices. The certainty that this, at least, belonged to her and no one could take it away. She thought about calling out, making noise, giving someone a chance to stop her. But the staff had been instructed not to disturb her. Sheikh Hamdan wouldn't return until 6. She had hours. Enough time to make sure this worked. Enough time to finally make a choice that was completely, entirely hers. At 3:27 in the afternoon, Alia Marie Navarro Al-Nayan stepped onto the chair. Her last thought wasn't of Sheikh Hamdan or the money or even her family. It was of her grandmother's hands, smelling like sampaguita flowers, touching her face at the airport. Your body is a temple, Lola Rosa had said. Guard it. I did, Alia thought. I guarded it until there was nothing left to guard. Then she stepped off the chair, and the golden cage finally opened. Sheikh Hamdan found her at 6:15 that evening, 18 minutes after his self-imposed deadline. He'd brought dinner, another peace offering, probably expensive Filipino food meant to soften her resistance. Instead, he found the bedroom empty, the bathroom door ajar, and Alia hanging from the doorframe in her floral dress with letters arranged neatly on the bed like evidence at a crime scene. His first call wasn't to emergency services. It was to Khalid Al-Mazrui, his legal advisor. "We have a situation. The girl killed herself. Get here immediately and bring the crisis team." His second call was to Dr. Al-Mansouri. "Come back to the penthouse. Bring sedatives and your medical bag. We need to control the narrative before this becomes public." Only his third call, 23 minutes after finding Alia's body, was to emergency services. "My wife, I think please send someone. She's not breathing." The performance was flawless. Grief-stricken husband, shocked and devastated. But in those 23 minutes, Khalid had already arrived and removed the letters Alia had written. Evidence that contradicted the story they were about to tell disappeared into a briefcase, never to be seen again. When paramedics arrived, they found a scene carefully arranged. A distraught husband, a respected doctor already on scene providing medical assessment. A young woman who'd clearly been dead for hours, not minutes. The timeline didn't quite add up, but Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Nahyan was royalty, and in Dubai that meant certain questions didn't get asked too loudly. The official report, written within hours, was a masterpiece of misdirection. Alia Navarro Al Nahyan, age 23, deceased by apparent suicide. Contributing factors included recent marriage stress, cultural displacement, adjustment disorder, and possible pre-existing mental health conditions. The medical examiner noted evidence of recent sexual activity consistent with consummation of marriage. The hymenal examination findings mentioned in Dr. Al-Mansouri's report were characterized as normal variation within range. No mention of verification protocols. No mention of imprisonment. No mention of 48 hours of psychological torture. Sheikh Hamdan's official statement, released through his public relations team, was grief itself. "My beloved wife Alia struggled with the transition to married life and the pressure of living far from her family. Despite my best efforts to support her, she succumbed to depression and took her own life. I'm devastated by this loss and ask for privacy as I mourn." The story made local news briefly. Young Filipina bride dies in luxury penthouse. Tragic reminder of mental health importance. Support services available. Then it disappeared, buried under more important news about business deals and construction projects and the things that actually mattered in Dubai's carefully curated image. But some stories refused to stay buried. Rosa, the maid who'd spoken to Alia the morning after the wedding, couldn't sleep. She'd seen the bruises on Alia's arms, heard the crying through closed doors, watched a young woman's light dim over 48 hours until nothing remained. Rosa had signed a non-disclosure agreement when she was hired. She had a family in Manila depending on her salary. She had every reason to stay silent. Instead, she contacted Sister Lucia Chun, a Catholic nun who ran a support network for Filipino domestic workers in Dubai. "I need to talk to someone," Rosa said, "about the girl who died. About what really happened in that penthouse." Sister Lucia had been in Dubai for 15 years. She'd heard stories, collected testimonies from women too scared to go to police, too foreign to access justice. She knew about the temporary marriages that weren't temporary enough, the contracts written in languages brides couldn't read, the wealthy men who treated women as acquisitions rather than humans. When Rosa told her about Alia, about the medical testing and the imprisonment and the family being used as weapons, Sister Lucia knew exactly what she was hearing. This wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last unless someone broke the silence. She reached out to her network, to the Philippine Embassy, where Consular Officer Maria Navarro, no relation but same name, had been trying to check on Alia's welfare since the grandmother's worried call 3 days earlier. To other domestic workers who'd served in Sheikh Hamdan's household over the years. To a journalist named Nadia Yusuf who specialized in stories the UAE government preferred stayed unpublished. Piece by piece, a picture emerged. Sheikh Hamdan's pattern of seeking virgin brides from poor countries. The contracts with Arabic clauses never properly translated. The verification rituals. The women who disappeared when they didn't meet expectations. Nadia found Jasmine Torres in a remote province in the Philippines, living under a different name, still traumatized 4 years after her wedding night to Sheikh Hamdan. Jasmine had been 19, desperate to help her family, promised $2 million. The verification had broken something in her. She'd confessed to a fictional sexual history just to make it stop, signed an annulment agreement, accepted $200,000 in hush money, and spent the past 4 years trying to forget. But when she heard another Filipina had died, that the pattern had escalated from psychological torture to actual death, she decided to talk. Nadia tracked down Nadia Popescu in Romania, the gymnast from 2019. Similar story, verification ritual, refusal to participate, threats against her family. She'd fled back to Romania, broken her contract, and spent 2 years fighting legal threats from Sheikh Hamdan's lawyers before they finally gave up. And then there was Suni Chai Wong, whose file in Sheikh Hamdan's desk had simply said subject relocated, matter closed. Nadia contacted Suni's family in Bangkok. They hadn't heard from their daughter since 2021. Missing persons report filed. Never investigated. Trail went cold at Dubai airport. Nadia had a terrible suspicion about what subject relocated actually meant. On March 3, 2024, Nadia Yusuf published her investigation in Gulf Truth, an independent news site that operated outside UAE censorship. The article was titled "The Virgin Hunters: How Dubai's Elite Destroy Poor Women." It detailed 4 cases, 3 survivors and 1 death. It named Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Nahyan. It explained the verification protocols, the contracts, the pattern of abuse. It included testimony from Rosa, from Sister Lucia's network, from the women themselves. The UAE government tried to suppress it immediately. Gulf Truth's local servers were seized. Nadia received threats. The article disappeared from regional internet within hours. But the internet doesn't forget. The story had been copied, translated, shared across social media in a dozen languages before censorship could contain it. International media picked it up. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. Suddenly, Alia Navarro wasn't just a tragic suicide. She was the victim of a system that let wealthy men purchase and destroy women with legal impunity. The Navarro family, still in Cebu, still grieving, suddenly found themselves at the center of international attention. Reporters on their doorstep asking questions. Human rights organizations offering legal support. And Lola Rosa, 78 years old and destroyed by guilt, deciding she had nothing left to lose. She gave an interview to Filipino television, told the whole story, the Mar offer, the wedding she'd warned against, the video call where Alia had begged for help while her own family chose money over belief. "My granddaughter died because we sold her," Lola Rosa said, tears streaming down her face. "We sold her to a man who treated her like property. And when the property didn't meet his specifications, he broke her until she'd rather die than live. That's the truth. That's what your $2 million bought." The interview went viral. Protests erupted outside the Philippine embassy in Dubai. Diaspora Filipinos demanding justice. Women's rights organizations calling for investigation. The UAE was hosting an international business conference that week, trying to present itself as a modern, progressive nation. Instead, headlines worldwide were asking how this could happen in 2024. How could a wealthy man torture his bride with pseudoscientific virginity testing? How could she be imprisoned in her own home? How could she die and have it swept away as mental illness? Under international pressure, the UAE government had no choice but to reopen the investigation. Sheikh Hamdan was questioned. His lawyers presented the signed consent forms, the medical reports, the marriage contract. All legal, they argued. All voluntary. The woman was mentally unstable. He'd done nothing wrong. But then Dr. Rashid Al-Mansouri, facing potential loss of medical license, decided to cooperate. He provided full documentation of the verification protocol. Admitted the DNA testing was theatrical, scientifically meaningless. Confirmed Alia had been coerced through threats against her family. Described Sheikh Hamdan's explicit instructions to find inconsistencies regardless of actual findings, to keep her uncertain, to break her psychologically. The evidence was damning. In June 2024, 7 months after Alia's death, Sheikh Hamdan was charged with unlawful imprisonment, coercion, and creating conditions that directly led to her suicide. Not murder, the lawyers were too good for that, but enough that he faced actual consequences. Trial was set for September. He paid $5 million bail and continued living in his palace, attending business meetings, maintaining his social calendar. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Prosecution presented Rose's testimony, the doctor's cooperation, testimony from Jasmine and Nadia about the pattern of abuse. Defense argued that Alia was an adult who'd signed legal contracts, that her mental health was pre-existing, that Sheikh Hamdan couldn't be held responsible for her choices. The jury, carefully selected from Emirati citizens who understood the delicate balance between justice and protecting powerful families, deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty of coercion and unlawful restriction of liberty. Not guilty of manslaughter or causing death. Sentence: 3 years imprisonment, $50 million fine, permanent ban from marriage contracts with foreign nationals. Sheikh Hamdan would serve 18 months in a facility that was less prison and more luxury hotel. He'd pay the fine from accounts that wouldn't notice the loss. And in 18 months, he'd be free to continue his life, slightly inconvenienced but fundamentally unchanged. The Navarro family received a civil settlement. $30 million, more money than they'd ever imagined. Blood money that couldn't bring Alia back. Roberto refused to touch it. Maria couldn't look at it without seeing her daughter's face. They established the Alia Navarro Foundation, dedicated to protecting women from marriage trafficking and exploitation. Lola Rosa lived just long enough to see the first safe house open in Cebu. She died in 2025 at 79, still talking to Alia's photograph every night before bed. The UAE passed new legislation. Virginity testing prohibited in marriage contracts. Mandatory translation of all contract terms into bride's native language. Embassy oversight for international marriages involving significant financial transfers. Important reforms. Necessary changes. But laws only work when they're enforced, and enforcement requires challenging powerful men, and some things don't change no matter what the legislation says. Alia Marie Navarro died at 23 years old in a penthouse worth $47 million. She was an artist, a daughter, a sister, a woman who tried to save her family and lost herself in the process. Her death wasn't suicide. It was murder by 1,000 cuts. The cut of a contract she couldn't read. The cut of a family who chose money over belief. The cut of a man who saw her as property. The cut of a system that protected wealth over humanity. Each cut alone wasn't fatal. Together, they bled her dry until the only choice left was choosing how to end it. 3 years later, Sheikh Hamdan was free, his business empire intact. He never remarried publicly, though rumors persisted. And somewhere in the world, another young woman was probably sitting across from another wealthy man, hearing an offer that seemed like salvation, signing a contract she didn't fully understand, boarding a plane toward a future she couldn't imagine. Because as long as poverty exists, as long as desperate families need rescue, as long as wealthy men can purchase the illusion of purity, Alia's story will keep repeating. Different names, different countries, same ending. Unless someone breaks the cycle, unless someone says no to the money, unless someone believes that a daughter's life is worth more than any amount of cash. That's Alia's legacy. Not the foundation or the laws or the international attention, but the simple, terrible truth that she tried to tell before she died. Your body is not for sale. Not for $2 million. Not for your family's debt. Not for anyone's fantasy of untouched perfection. And if you ever find yourself in a golden cage, remember that some locks can only be opened from outside. Reach out. Scream. Break windows. Because dying free is not better than living imprisoned. Living free is. And Alia Navarro deserved that chance. She deserved so much more than what the world gave her. Remember her name.